we have the first two books on sale, and then Barbara Claypole White's book is The Promise Between Us that we're gonna be talking about today. So I'm just gonna give a little introduction. There she goes, she's got her copy. And Barbara Evers has her book 3 cover in the background there for you guys to see.
Isn't that amazing?
It's beautiful. So I'm going to give a little introduction for them, and then they're going to talk for a little while. They each have some readings for us and some questions for each other, mostly about character development. I'm really excited to hear what they have to say about this. If you have any questions, put them in the chat window for me, and I'll voice them for the authors. And if you have anyone who's having trouble getting online, have them email me, Jackie@hubcity.org, and I will help them get on the event. So to start, we're going to start with Barbara V. Evers. Began storytelling at the age of 4. She couldn't read yet, so she roped others into taking direct dictation for her. She is the author of the Watchers of the Naiad trilogy and is a Pushcart Prize nominee. A 2-time Carrie McRae winner, her short stories and essays have appeared in the best-selling anthology, Child of My Child, Poems and Stories for Grandparents, the Pettigrew Review, the Moonshine Review, and Stupefying Stories. In addition, she's judged several writing contests, been a slush pile reader, and contributes to multiple blogs, including 2 of her own. Barbara is the leader for the Greenville chapter of the South Carolina Writers Association and has served on the SCWA Board of Directors multiple times, including as president of the board in 2009. When she's not writing, Barbara is a professional trainer, speaker, and freelance writer-editor who has taught and written customized training programs for multiple clients, including 3 colleges. In addition, Barbara enjoys contributing her skills of teaching to the creative writing community and has taught several workshops at conferences and special events. Barbara lives in Greer, South Carolina with 2 of her grandchildren, her husband Bruce, and a rescue dog named Roxy. Best-selling author Barbara Claypole White was born in rural England, but writes in gardens in the forests of North Carolina. Her award-winning, emotionally charged book club fiction features complicated relationships, troubled characters with invisible disabilities, crazy critters, and a big old dollop of Southern hope. She is also an OCD advocate for the A2A Alliance, a nonprofit that promotes advocacy over adversity. Barbara's novels include The Unfinished Garden, The In-Between Hour, The Perfect Son, Echoes of Family, and The Promise Between Us, which was a 2018 Novelist Silver Award winner and a 2019 American Fiction Awards finalist. Thank you both for joining us. We're so glad to have you today.
Okay, so we flipped a coin and I get to go first. So what I was going to do, first of all, here is the, oops, let's see if we can get it when I've got this virtual background. I don't know if that's going to show up very good, but that's the cover of the first book, The Watchers of Mania. My copies of The Watchers in Exile have not come yet. They're supposed to show up tomorrow. So I'll get them to Jackie as soon as I can. But what I thought I would do is use one of my secondary characters from book 1, because secondary characters are a lot of fun. And I wanted to read to you a section from book 1 where just the little bit you need to know is our protagonist, Adana, has been sent to the kingdom of Elwar. Everything's different. Everything's unusual. She's having to dress differently. It's a patriarchal kind of location. She's used to matriarchal and so forth. And the young princess, Lyra, who is probably the closest person to her age there, this is one of our first real introductions to Lyra. The one thing, if you've not read these books or looked at them at all, you need to know that Adana has a telepathic connection with a giraffe named Ambrosia. So when I mentioned that, hopefully that won't throw you for a loop. It is fantasy. So, but anyway, I'm going to read a little bit here. Adana sat on the floor, skirts billowed up around her while deep in the trance-like state created by the connection with Ambrosia. The animal relaxed their trance with a slight nudge, warning of another presence in the room. When Adana opened her eyes, she stifled a groan. Bent over, a curious mew to her mouth, Lyra's blue eyes stared into Adana's face. When Adana continued to stare back, Lyra jumped back, clutching her hands in her skirts. Oh dear! Adana jumped up and tripped over her skirts again. Lyra smirked as Adana stumbled around to get her footing and then said, "Why did you have such a blank look on your face? I thought you'd gone quite loony." Adana considered her options. She needed to find some common ground with the princess, so she sat on the edge of the bed and studied Lyra a moment. Most young girls in Manaya mooned over the giraffe herds. The tall, gentle beast might be exotic enough to draw the girl's interest. I was connected to Ambrosia, my giraffe. The answering sparkle of interest in Lyra's eyes warmed Adana's heart. The princess, only a couple of years younger than Adana, might be just like the girls back home. Your giraffe? The one called Ambrosia? I miss her, Adana sighed. Stretched over such a great distance, their connection burned raw like a wound pulled wide open. Ambrosia suffered too. Lyra had managed to interrupt Adana's efforts to find out if Ambrosia knew the source of the crystals or something else to soothe their pain. Lyra walked over and patted Adana's hand in an elaborate show of sympathy. Her voice resonated with the comforting tone she used with her horse. Of course you do. Mother says savages feel more at home with animals than people. Savages? Adana shot out of her seat and towered over the young girl. We're not savages. The giraffe is a nobler beast than your beloved horses. At least I can talk to mine. Can you talk to your horse? A flash of irritation crossed Lyra's face. In a waspish tone, she said, Of course I talk to my horse. She laughed, a bright tinkle incongruous with her behavior. I don't expect her to speak back, though. Only people can communicate, and at least my horse can carry me where I want to go. You have to walk beside your pet. Pet? Adana reared back to blast Lyra again when a warming sensation rolled over her mind. Ambrosia advised diplomacy. Lyra had never seen a giraffe, so Adana relaxed her stance and changed tactics. The giraffe is a noble animal. It exhibits intelligence beyond your imagination. We learn of danger from the giraffe first. That's why the watchers copy the giraffe's behavior. A look of delight crossed Lyra's face, giving Adana hope. If Lyra began to show interest, she might even share with her the secret of the unusual journey she experienced with Ambrosia on the day her mother died. She'd make sure Lyra understood the honor. She hadn't told anyone about jumping from one giraffe site to the next. But Lyra pounced forward, excitement in her eyes. Copy? You copy giraffes? Show me. Do you stretch your neck like them? Do it. Lyra began to prance around the room, her neck extended, her nose stuck high in the air. Is this how? Show me. On the last word, the girl whirled around to face Adana. She stomped her foot and arched an eyebrow in challenge. Then she smiled and started walking around with her nose in the air, again humming a silly tune. So that's one of the first times we really meet Lyra. And it's one of the first times Adana finds herself dealing with someone one-on-one that doesn't get her culture, that doesn't get what she is. She's a warrior. She's connected to this giraffe. She lives in a very different world. And so we see that when she's challenged, she doesn't quite know what to do with it. And Lyra is, I mean, she's kind of like a mean girl at this point, and she's just having a blast, harassing this girl. Now we find out over time there are things that have caused Lyra to do this. But the interesting thing is, this is book 3 behind me. Lyra is all the way through all 3 books. And her story arc is very interesting as it moves forward, and she grows up during this story, but she's still stomping that foot in book 3. It's so hilarious that she's still got that kind of that silliness about her, and at the same time a maturity as she grows older, and she still loves to kind of poke at people no matter what's going on. In fact, in another scene in this, she chooses to do something to poke back at her mother, who actually doesn't like Adana either. So she probably is one of the most fun characters to write, because I can make her do all the things that you sometimes wish you could do, but no, that's not good, that's not right, we don't do this. Or I can make her do things that I've seen other people do. She's got remnants of Nellie Olson in her, for those of you who remember Little House on the Prairie. But she's more, and I just really had a lot of fun writing her. So Barbara, do you want to do yours?
Yeah, let's see if I can you guys hear me? And I've got, now I can't actually see myself. So hang on a second. This is a little weird. This is a little weird. And those who know me know that I am technically challenged. So I'm not quite sure how to get myself. I can see you, Barbara, but I can't see me. But you guys can all see me, right? So we'll just go with the flow from that one. I can just like see myself up in the corner. So yeah, I'm going to read a couple of pages from my 5th novel, The Promise Between Us. The pages that I'm going to choose to read are not pages I normally read from. There are 2 reasons I've chosen these particular pages. One is that Barbara and I, the Southern Barbara, as opposed to the Brit Barbara, and I are going to be talking about character development. And I have a weakness for creating really sort of funky secondary characters. I love secondary characters. And I love, more than anything else, my passion as a writer is writing messed up middle-aged men. So I wanted to introduce you to one of my secondary characters who's a messed up middle-aged man, and his name is Jake Vaughan in this book. And I also wanted to give you a taste of what it's like to experience OCD as a child without reading anything that could trigger anyone in the audience, because I don't know who's out there. The problem with reading from this book is that both my heroine, Katie Mack, who's quite a famous, at this point, metal artist, and her estranged, I should say her biological daughter, Maisie, who's now 11, suffer with something called harm OCD, which is, there's no such thing as textbook OCD. It's a highly individualized anxiety disorder. But harm OCD tends to manifest as intrusive, unwanted, obsessive, horrific thoughts and images of bad things happening to people you love. And when it slips into postpartum OCD, which is what my heroine has before the novel begins, it's why she abandons her baby. It also tends to manifest as horrific images of you doing things that you know you would never do in your heart, but your brain shows you otherwise, which is hurt someone you love. Because OCD is really about hyper responsibility. You know, am I a good person? Have I done something wrong? And and then down the worry, what if you go? So because OCD is such an important thread in this book, I did want to just give you a taste of it without triggering anyone. And I know this sounds a little bizarre, but my husband, who has OCD, did not make it past 50 pages of this book. And he's a fierce advocate for my work and has read all my stuff. So if you suffer from harm OCD, please don't read this book. Having said that, it's a very, very hopeful story. And it's based on the premise, can you be a good mother if you abandon your baby? And it goes back, there is a small group of really good people, of which Jake is one of them, who make really bad decisions, all related to a decision that my heroine makes 10 years before the story starts, when she is trapped in the horrors of postpartum OCD. Her name is Caitlin McDonald. She's a teacher. She's a new mother. She sees these horrific images of her hurting her baby, and she thinks she's a monster. So she runs away and abandons her baby. And then 10 years later, when the novel starts, the small group of people who are actually involved in what happened when she ran away. There were already 4 of them, Katie and her sister Delaney, and Jake and his best friend Callum, and Callum is Maisie's dad. Now, why is Jake such an important character? Well, Jake is actually Maisie's godfather. And when Caitlin ran away, Jake was out in Hollywood. He's a washed up Hollywood actor. His height of fame is that he made $350,000 for an afternoon's work on a hemorrhoid cream commercial. And he's also famous for behaving very badly on set. So he got kicked off a soap opera, and his character got chopped into pig fodder because the director hated him so much. So he's got his issues, says Jake. And Jake was also an orphan, and he was dyslexic and had behavioral issues in school. But the one kid who was nice to him was Callum. And Jake made Callum a promise when they were kids. And the promise between us has multi layers. This title has multi-layered meanings. But to me, when I see that, I always think the story really goes back to a promise that Jake made to his best friend when they were Maisie's age. So I'm just going to introduce you to Jake, and Jake is trying to figure out what's going on with Maisie. Now, nobody really, I don't think anybody actually knows Maisie better than Jake. He helped raise her for 9 years, because when Caitlin ran away, he moved back and lived with them and helped raise her. But 3 things have happened in Maisie's life, and anyone who knows anything about OCD knows that OCD hates change. Maisie has 3 big changes happening in her life. Her dad Maisie's been brought up to believe that her mother was dead. This comes back to one of the bad decisions that this small group of really good people made. So Maisie has a new stepmom. Her dad just got married. Her new stepmom is pregnant. And Maisie's also worrying about that great big thing out yonder called middle school. So that's what's triggered her OCD. And Jake knows something's up, and he's trying to figure it out. What he doesn't know that Maisie has actually reconnected with her biological mother, Katie, and Maisie doesn't know that either. But Katie has actually met Maisie and figured out that her daughter also has OCD. So here we go. This is Jake. He nodded at a bench that overlooked the river. Let's sit and talk, catch up on our week. Maisie sat and examined the hem of her oversized t-shirt. You and Lila Rose getting along? Maisie shrugged. A bird gave a solitary whistle. I'm finding it hard, sharing your daddy. How about you? It's getting easier, although I hope the baby's a girl. I don't think I want a brother. Sorry, but you won't have any control over that one. Is it still bothering you, the whole idea of calling Lila Rose mom? Want me to talk with your daddy some more? No, thank you. It's very important to him, and I'm trying super hard to cooperate. Maisie pulled up her legs and hugged them. She'd always been able to tuck herself up like a hermit crab. Tell me something again about my real mom. Not much you don't know. Your mama was beautiful and smart, kind and funny, real good at math too. Come on, baby, what aren't you telling me? A crow cawed, and they both looked up at the dead tree in front of them, its skeletal fork pointing into the now cloud-covered sky. Do you ever worry about bad stuff happening to me? Maisie chewed on her lip. Only since the second I moved in with you and your daddy. It was a huge responsibility being your babysitter, bigger than huge. Jake measured out huge with his arms spread wide, and Maisie giggled. Because I love you more than anyone, and I didn't want to mess up. The birds fell silent. Do you ever think about starting a family, Uncle Jay? Now, what nonsense is that? I have a family, you and your daddy. Maisie heaved out a mighty big sigh for a small person. Don't you miss Los Angeles? My heart was always here, you know that. Besides, I never cared too much about the fame. That kind of drive can wreck a life. Since I was younger than you, all I wanted was to act, and that part wasn't working out so well. After I got fired off that not very nice soap opera, I was jobless. When your daddy suggested I visit for your birthday, it seemed like the perfect time to check out the movie scene down south. But it didn't take more than half a day to decide your daddy needed my help more. Once I moved in with you guys, life got real simple, real fast. And simple's pretty darn good. Is that how you feel? That life's good? She rested her cheek on her knees. Actually, I find there's quite a lot to worry about. Want to be more specific? One of our teachers had to take time off because her sister died having a baby. Oh, I get it. Jake wrapped his arm around her. Childbirth can turn dangerous, but the doctors know ahead of time there's a problem brewing. Your stepmama's in great shape and everything's as normal can be. Nothing bad's going to happen. Is this why you've been wound a little tight recently? Maisie shrugged. Had she inherited something nasty from her mama? If only he could remember what Delaney had said about her sister. Not that they'd ever done a whole lot of talking. But what if I'm the problem? Darling, you've never been a problem a single day of your life, except when you got thrown out of preschool because all you did was cry for your daddy and started sleeping so poorly I became nuttier than a squirrel turd. The Eno had stopped moving. A frog croaked and humidity bore down on his shoulders. But I keep worrying I am. Maisie sat up. I keep worrying I'm a bad kid and Lila's going to die because of me. Whoa, back up. You and I have active imaginations, but there's no relationship between your behavior and Lila Rose's pregnancy. That flat out ain't possible. Maisie gave him that adoring look with her huge hazel eyes. How come she never saw him as others did, a screw-up with above-average acting skills? But what if I'm the causation of stress? Stress is very bad for pregnancy, and Ava Grace once said, I can get on her last nerves like no one's business. That's Ava Grace's mama talking, and she's got less sense than a flamingo lawn ornament. Uncle Jay, well, I'm just stating fact. Any guy could figure out that woman's greatest assets had nothing to do with her brain. If you're going to start worrying as much as your daddy, you got to come clean with me, because I know you, amazing Maisie. You'll keep it all to yourself so as not to upset anyone. Next thing, you'll start building up those walls, and you know what I say about walls. You have to tear them down. That you do. And you and me, we tell it like it is with each other and stay positive, because your daddy worries enough for all three of us, right? She puckered her lips. You know what I think? When a brilliant young mind has something tough to process, it gets way too creative. Is this all about what happened with your real mama? Maisie cleared her throat several times. Please tell me, baby. Promise you won't tell my dad? Jake Maisie pinky swear. Sometimes I see Lila dying, and I worry that if I thought it, it'll come true. She's not, is she, going to die? That's a storyteller in you, looking for the dark side of life. My brain fills up with stuff I don't want to think about, and even my absolute things aren't fun anymore. She scratched her leg like she had a mess of chigger bites. It's very frightening, Uncle Jay. Jake pulled her closer. I don't know what's going on, but I promise I'll do all I can to help. And you know how seriously I take my promises.
You know, it's been so long since I've read that one, but Jake was one of these characters that I really didn't like in the beginning.
Oh no, he's a complete anti-hero.
Yeah.
But you know, so is Felix, who's the hero of The Perfect Son. A lot of readers didn't like Jake. I loved him. I loved him from the beginning, and the reason that I love Jake is because I love how fiercely he loves Maisie. Mm-hmm. That is, protecting that little girl is everything to him, and I understand that as a parent. I have that, and he actually does really become a good guy, and he and Katie obviously actually do join forces, but he gives her a really hard time when they reconnect.
Yeah, he does. I do remember that part, and I really love that story. And it's kind of interesting because you love him. A lot of your readers hate him. I have a lot of people who have read book 1 of The Watchers of Mania, and they can't stand Lyra, and they can't stand Shanna. And they're telling me all the things about Malagon that are, they've come up with all these opinions of people and what's going to happen to people. And it kind of cracks me up because they're talking about some of the characters that are the most fun to write because they are so much different from what you would consider the normal person.
Right. And I think too that, people always project onto characters. Mm-hmm. So I realize that there are certain things, you really shouldn't do as a fiction writer if you want to keep your readers happy. And one of it is obviously, no one can have an affair. Apparently you can't kill a dog. I've done worse than kill a dog. No spoilers there. But I think, that's what's so interesting when people see things in your characters that you didn't like. I did a book club, and there was a young couple, gay couple in the book club, and one of the guys said to me, "Is Jake bisexual?" And I said, "You know what is so interesting? My husband kept saying to me, why did Jake leave LA to come back? That makes no sense. He's got to be in love with Callum." I said, "No, he's not gay. He's not. He's heterosexual. We had a fight about it." I said, "He's my character. I know his sexuality." And then here's this young guy who's saying, you know, are you sure that he's not bisexual? And then I started thinking, well, that's interesting because, you know, maybe at some point he experimented a little bit, you know, he's an alley cat. He has loose morals in the bedroom. So I don't know, but I mean, it's kind of interesting. So I mean, who is your favorite character? Who was your favorite character to write? Who is?
Well, Lyra's fun. So is Shanna. But I would say in book 2, a character appears, Brother Honest. And I love Brother Honest. He is such a cool person.
He is. Sorry, I got to tell you guys, I'm in the middle of reading book 2. And actually, I'm not. I've only got 30% left and I'm going to finish it tonight, whatever happens. I love him. As soon as he appeared on the page, I loved him. He makes really your blood pressure go kind of, doesn't he?
He does. He does. He's one of these people, he gets the job done. When you first meet him, he's breaking a guy out of jail, but he gets the job done. But at the same point, he's like, okay, but, you know, let's breathe.
Well, and so you know that he knows things, but he's not going to force, you, the character, to have a conversation, and he's not going to, you know, thrust what he knows onto someone else. He kind of lets them come to him. And when you're, you know, he's just a very gentle, wise soul. And I think it's great to have, because, you know, obviously during a time of war, when so much going on, it's great to have a character like that.
Yeah, he's really a lot of fun to do. And the interesting thing is, when I was writing this and taking this into my writing group long before it was published, my writing group forgot that when he was introduced that he was a guy who looked to be about 30. And because he's this wise person, they made him so much older than he is. And he's not, and that's really important in book 3. And that's all I can tell you about that one there. But he came to me fully formed. I knew exactly who he was. And I'm sitting here thinking about, and I saw somebody ask something about names. I saw that pop up, but I was thinking about, who is this guy? And he introduces himself, and my fingers just typed, my name is Honest. And I'm like, yeah, that is his name. Isn't that interesting? And I had people push back and say, that's a weird name. I said, yeah, but it's his name. And
but I also like it because it's memorable. It's memorable, and it fits him.
It's very different. And I had to think about that. I was like, well, does that mean that the teachers of the faith take a new name? And I don't think they do. And I don't know if that's one thing I don't know, is if he was born with another name and he took this one, or if it was a nickname or what. That I don't know. I just know his name is Honest. And you can trust him. He's gonna do what he's gonna do. Now, doesn't mean he can't, do a little bit of play acting to make something work. But
so is that rare for you, to have a character just stroll into your head fully formed, or how do you find your characters? Do you have a process to find your characters?
A few do. A few of them just appear. Some of them are a little harder to figure out. Adana is a character that I've learned about as I've written her. It's interesting because she's the protagonist, and for the longest time I had this idea of who she was, and as the story started happening, I was like, isn't that interesting? And she kind of shifted and changed, and I wrote some things, and then I was like, nope, that's not her. She's not this whiny little girl over here. We got to change this. And so some of them are art. Honest was full blown. Lyra was pretty much full blown when I started writing her. I saw her clear as day. Queen Quilla, King Donnell, King Micah. I told this to somebody the other day who's been talking to me about these books and was dying for them to come out. I told him who my original basis was for Donnell and Micah, and you're never going to believe this, but when I started writing them, all I could see was the Disney animated movie Sleeping Beauty and the two fathers. And so Micah is Sleeping Beauty's father, and Donnell is Prince Philip's father. Now they changed, but that was my basis for them when they started. And I kind of saw, and if you look at it, I described Donnell as kind of portly and Micah as taller and quieter. And so they grew out of something from my childhood. It was kind of interesting how that happened. And over time they developed. Kiffin was kind of like Adana. I had to learn about Kiffin too. But I knew more about Kiffin than I knew about Adana. And it's kind of interesting because Adana is the protagonist in the story. Monty was one who came fully developed. Casa definitely is fully developed. From the day I started writing Casa, I knew everything about that woman. You know, I knew how she looked, I knew how she walked, I knew how she acted, everything. And you probably notice what's the one thing I say about her throughout the book, her hawk-like stare.
Yeah.
And she has kind of that hawk visage to her face. And if she stares at you, you feel like you're prey, right? And she's always been that person. But she does have a soft side to her that comes out some in book 1. We'll see more of it in book 3, but we also see the tough side.
That's so interesting, having a series to, you know, to let your characters and watch your characters grow within a series. As all my books are standalones,
right?
Jake is coming back in my, what I'm hoping will be novel 6. I'm literally tomorrow morning I'm sending it to my agent and we'll see if it's ready for submission. But Jake comes back because his story wasn't done by the end of The Promise, and he got under my skin. He's a character who really got under my skin. I couldn't let him go.
Right.
But so I've never written a series, and I'm wondering, you know, that's got to be really, by the time you got to the 3rd book, did you just kind of have, well, I kind of know where I want to go in the plot, and then I'm just going to let them do their thing? And did they constantly surprise you and do things you weren't expecting them to do because you've got more room to, or is it the opposite, because you've had all this time to play around with these characters and suddenly, damn, it's like, you know, the walls are closing, I've got to get it ends, because there's a lot happens in the 1st and 2nd book, an awful lot happens.
A whole lot happens. That's true. In book 3, I didn't actually write until after I had signed the publishing contract. And I had to get it written quickly because the only way they were going to release book 1 in December was if book 3 was already written.
But you knew
so I wrote book
trilogy from the beginning.
Yeah, I knew it was going to be a trilogy, not from the beginning. I actually thought it was going to be one book. That one book became books 1 and 2, and it didn't end there. And I was like, no, wait a minute, that's, you know, so things did change on me. Book 3, basically what happened is I started writing, I'm like, I'm going to miss something because this is epic fantasy. So there's all these story arcs, all these threads, and I had to, I'm not a plotter. Those are the people who outline their books. I'm more of a pantser, but I had to plot a little bit. So I sat down and I made a bare bones outline. Okay, this is going to happen. 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 This, you know, but it was very trim. It did not get into a lot of details of how anything was going to happen. I just knew things were going to happen. And I slept on that for 2 days. I'm like, oh, I forgot about these people. I had to go put them in there. And so then I wrote using that as a guide because I was terrified I'd leave a thread unraveled. And so I used it as a guide to make sure everything came together. And book 3 is 116,000 words. To give you an idea, book 1 was 94,000 or 96,000, something like that. So we've got an extra 20,000 words in book 3. And I probably could have written more, but let's face it, there comes a point where you're like, I got to get this to somebody. And I half expected them to cut a lot of that out, and they didn't. So it was tough. And the interesting thing was, because I am a pantser, I do let the characters take off and I do let them do things. And that's part of the reason why there's 3 women on the cover of book 3. And that's all I'll say about them, because those 3 women, 2 of them seriously tried to take over the book. Seriously. tried
That's
to
what
take over.
happened to Jake in The Promise Between Us. And
Yeah.
even though he's not the hero, I mean, I had to fight to keep him in place. So, because I actually have 5 point of view chapters. I mean, you have lots of point of view chapters and point of view characters. I have 5 in The Promise Between Us, the most I've ever had. And I actually had to, do a chart to see how many chapters everyone had. Because at one point, Jake was only ever meant to be from the point of view of my heroine, Katie, my hero, Callum, and the stepmother, Lila Rose. It was only ever meant to be from their 3 points of view. But then I realized Katie had to have her say. And, we needed to hear from Katie. We needed to know what was going on in her head. And then it was like, as soon as Jake gets on the page, it's like, come on, darling, you gotta let me talk. I mean, I hear Jake in my head and I see him and, I see his body language and he just kept wanting more chapters. And it was like, okay, but you're not the hero. You're not, you just remember that.
The interesting
conversations.
The interesting thing from that book is Jake is the one I visualized the best when I read that.
Yeah.
My visualization of him stuck with me, whereas the other characters not as much. So I get what you're saying there. Now he's in the next book, the one you're sending off to your agent. Is he? Yes. It sounds really interesting. Why don't you tell us a little bit about it and tell me what is his part? And is he the main character in this new book, or
no, he's not. And he doesn't have
a side guy.
Huh?
He's still on the side, huh?
He's still a secondary character. No, my hero is Luca, who is a struggling father and a single farmer. And Luca is trying to save the family. Luca is a chemist who got laid off and his marriage fell apart, and he moved back to the family farm in Orange County to help save it, and realized the way to do it was to open a gin distillery because he could use all the grain, because he realized his dad had created like an organic farm. So his plan is to save the family farm with a gin distillery. So this is 2017 in rural Carolina, when gin isn't really a thing and the brunch laws only just come in. And so he's trying to kind of change the mindset of the South a little bit. But into this, he has to, his teen son comes to stay with him for the summer, and he's got a lot going on in his life. And that's just kind of all I'm going to say. It's a book about guys, gin, grief, and a groundhog. And it's very quirky and very hopeful. And but it's got lots of middle-aged men in, because that's my thing. That's what I want to write about.
And you tell me that. And the funny thing is, when I read your books, what I think of your thing is more about some of the mental health issues people have, the OCD. You've got the story with the young man with Tourette's. You've got people with anxiety, and one of the things that drew Barbara and I closer to each other, we'd met each other at a conference where we both were teaching workshops, but what drew me closer is I'm raising 2 grandchildren, and they are both ADHD and they both have anxiety, and my grandson's OCD anxiety also. And so her books, I was pulling her books back out and going, okay, I need to look at some of this stuff again, because it's one thing to read the technical stuff and all the information that you can get, but it's another thing. She gets into the minds of these characters, and you can learn so much through her characters about some of these issues that people deal with. And I think I learned more in just a few pages of The Unfinished Garden. I learned more about my grandson there than I've learned from any other resource, including counselors and so forth. So your research is, it's got to be phenomenal what you do there.
Well, I do a lot of one-on-one research. I'm a history major, so that's my favorite thing to do. So I've done so much research for the Gin Club. It's because, I'm not, Luca is a chemist, he's a scientist, and he gets very excited about foraging and his organic herbs. And I mean, I'm a big gardener, but I know nothing about science. I know nothing about farming. I had to figure all that out. And then he has a teen son who has crippling social anxiety, and is also being bullied. So, you know, I do a lot of one-on-one interviews, and because like you, I'm not a plotter. I kind of get these ideas and then I just go wherever my brain kind of follows, and I find these things and I went, oh yeah, that's kind of cool, and I kind of throw it all together, and some of it works and some of it doesn't. And then but I do a phenomenal amount of research. I research everything. I research groundhogs, for goodness sake. Yeah, you know, and damage they do in the garden. You know, that's just kind of the way I am. But I, you know, I find these people who are living these experiences that I want to write about, and because I have 3 very spunky female characters in the gin club, and one is a recovering addict, an alcoholic. She's 10 years clean and sober, and I love this woman. And I actually spent a year on her story and ended up abandoning it because it wasn't kind of working. But I had already found Luca, who's the hero of the gin club, in that story. And you know, I spent a lot of time, you know, talking to recovering addicts, and so I just contact people and I say, would you talk to me? Would you tell me your story? And I just let them talk and I listen. And then I was talking to one guy one time in relation to, there was a legal thing I was trying to figure out, because one of my characters in the gin club, basically, because Luca is trying to sort of save the family farm and save his son, he also sort of needs volunteers to help bottle his gin. So he corrals this group of guys through an ad, and they become the gin club. And of course, they're going to help him save a great deal more than just the farm. But they're all like lonely dads who are just looking for a place to go. And so I knew one of them was a lawyer, and I was interviewing this lawyer, and he just mentioned something about being a guardian ad litem. And I went, oh, what is that? I've never heard of that. And that's become a huge thread. A guardian ad litem is someone who basically volunteers to be the voice of a child in court. Doesn't have to be a lawyer. So then I went down the rabbit hole, you know, with that. And it's just, yeah, it's very interesting. So there are so many real people behind all my fictional people.
Right.
And they've all shared their stories. I mean, the stories about postpartum OCD brought me to tears. I remember one time I was interviewing someone, and she was in a Walmart parking lot in her car, and we were on the phone. We both started crying. I'm really sorry. I don't really mean to make you talk about this, but you know, she was saying, no, I'm an advocate too, and it's good. People need to know about this. But you know, it was, you know, and I learned to weld because Katie is a welder. So I took, you know, I went off to Liberty Arts and learned how to weld, and that also, you know, when you also figure out your character's professions, like sort of knowing, you know, I've struggled to learn Luca in the same way that you struggled with your protagonist, because I had this block about the fact that he had a science brain and I'm pure arts. I mean, the last chemistry exam I took, I was 14, I got 29%. I mean, I flunked science all the way. I'm just a straight art student, you know, and I read history, and I wanted to go to art college if I didn't, you know, go and read history or English at university. So I never had any interest in science. And I think that fear kind of kept holding me back. And I was spending so much time with the other characters. I realized, hang on a second, I'm ignoring my protagonist. He's like a bystander in his story, and that's, you know,
Right.
so it's kind of interesting. So I learned a lot of him on the page, and I've been having these great conversations with a big dude, chemist, who's a dean. He's a physicist and a dean at UNC, who's actually one of my husband's great pals. He's been helping me figure out. And the amazing thing is that a lot of the stuff I'd figured out about Luca, he said, actually, you know, that's exactly what a really good chemist would think. And so
That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. So and the interesting thing is, you know, I have a bachelor's degree in zoology. So a lot of people are like, oh, that makes sense for the giraffes, although it really had nothing to do with why giraffes ended up in the story. I just love giraffes so much. And the Watchers are these female warriors, and they have these traits. I gave them the traits of a giraffe, you know, the height, the keen vision, the ability to kind of be very stoic, and you can't really read them, but they can read the signs and they can alert people to danger and so forth. And then I read something somewhere where they were trying to figure out how giraffe communicate. And at that point, they had decided that maybe it was more of a telepathic way of communication. Now we know now that they actually do communicate on such a low pitch that we just can't hear it. But at that point, I was like, telepathic giraffes. Why don't I have giraffes in my story? And so all of a sudden there were giraffes in my story. And you know, you've done the research on chemistry. I've read almost everything there is to read about giraffes, and there's not a lot.
And you know, the interesting thing is that people sometimes don't realize how much research you have to do in contemporary novels as well. One of my brother-in-laws once
right. The
said, well, at least you're not writing historical fiction. You don't have to do any research. Gina went, I research everything.
I have to tell you, and I see Rob Brown sitting there. Rob, this story's for you, because in book 1, they hunt a boar. I spent hours one day on YouTube looking up boar hunting because I needed to get the sound of the boar right. And so it's just kind of weird, the things you will do and the things you'll look up. You know, so I spent hours just looking at boars and what sounds do they make? And well, if you shoot an arrow into a bow, you know, if you kill them with an arrow, what is it going to sound like? And, you know, I was looking at that scene the other day and I'm like, okay, I know I pulled that into this scene, but I don't know how much of this I made up and how much of it I got from the research now. But I spent hours one day just look, and I was amazed how much was on YouTube on hunting boar. I mean, I was watching videos on hunting boar.
Well, you know, and as poor Jackie knows, you and I can talk forever. And I think I'm looking at the time. I think probably she's trying to interrupt us and get on to read a question.
Thank you, Barbara. I was waiting for no, you're fine. There's only one question in the chat so far, so I was just letting you guys. That was great and very informative. I wanted Miss Evers to finish that one thing she was saying before I interrupted. But since she was talking about Rob, he did have a question about, and maybe you guys can talk about this a little bit together for a couple minutes. We have about 10 minutes left. In the fantasy genre, character and place names often have specific meanings. So when you're talking about Honest, like, and some other characters, did you have a specific meaning behind all of the characters' names, and how did you come to those names?
Well, I have to tell you, the funny thing is I gave characters very simple names to begin with. And they were just names that came to me. And they are not the names they have now. That's a significant thing to keep in mind. Adana originally was Adriana. And I was at a conference and a agent said to me, why didn't you just call her Tiffany? Good grief. This is in Africa. What are you doing? And I was like, you know what? She's right. So I wanted to find a name that was similar to Adriana, but that was African. And Adana is an African name, and it means her father's daughter or something along those lines. And she is very much her father's daughter in the story. She's also her mother's daughter, but her father is part of the reason why her story goes the way it goes, because her father changed the path of their kingdom beforehand. So I felt like that was very fitting. And I started going through and I changed almost all the names. Danelle was always Danelle. I don't know where that name came from. Plutarch was always Plutarch. No, it's not Plutarch. It's Plutarch. That was just, I felt like that described who he was. It sounded like him, you know. Lyra, you know, she kind of, Lyra and Quilla, their names I think stayed the same, but then you start getting into characters as I moved into other parts of the story. Casa was not Casa to begin with. Monty was, but Casa wasn't. And I have, my computer knows where to go look for translations. And I'm translating into other languages. Sometimes I'm going, okay, well, what does this mean in African? What does this mean in Swahili? What does this mean? And I'm looking for a word that will fit my naming conventions, and all the females, their names end with a vowel, all the males don't. So I had to find words that fit my naming conventions. And the majority of the names have an actual meaning to them that are related to the character's personality or place in the actual story. So yeah, I did do that. And Ambrosia, the giraffe Ambrosia, has always been Ambrosia. There's a long story about that we don't have time for right now. But Baidish, which is the giraffe that is bonded to Adana's betrothed, I don't want to give away if nobody's read book 1, was not initially named Baidish. He, for some reason, had this name Maltut, and I felt like that sounded like malcontent. And so I went looking for a name, and I'd have to go back and look what Baidish means now, but it has something to do with survival, and he's there for a purpose and so forth. And Baidish is kind of an amazing thing in this book because he should have died because his original bond, Saren, died. And one of the things that happens is if you're telepathically bonded to a giraffe, if the giraffe dies, the person lives, but they're never quite as the same. But if the person dies, the giraffe does die. So it was unusual that when Saren died, Baidish did not. And part of book 1's about why is Baidish still around? What's going on with Baidish? You know, it's kind of interesting, but yeah, the names, there was some purpose behind the majority of the names. And I'll just tell you, Kiffin was a family name. I always wanted to have a son and name him Kiffin. I never had a son. So I named Kiffin in my book.
I love that name.
Thank you. There is one other question for both of you, if I can pop in with that real quick. Can you both suggest one of your favorite writing tools for character development? That is from Connie.
Ah.
Oh.
Do you have one, Barbara?
Well, I kind of do, and it's a little weird. Well, it's not that weird actually. I like to, if I'm kind of really stuck on a character, I love to do like stream of consciousness stuff. I actually like to put a character in a room and imagine I'm not really interrogating him and not quite interviewing him, having a conversation, but in a setting that could be something that the character might be hostile about. It's kind of interesting. I know this sounds kind of weird, but it's sort of like a police interrogation room, but it's not. So the character could think of it that way. And so, like, you know, I put Jake and Callum in the same room. Callum is Maisie's dad, and you know, Callum comes in. He's tall and Celtic. He's the professor. He's very, you know, sort of together, although he does have some anxiety. And you know, he sat and he crossed his legs and put his arms and said, you know, what can I tell you? And Jake came in and he, you know, he leaned forward to kind of get in my face, you know, rested his arms on his knees and said, hello, darling. And I went, oh my God, that's Jake. You know? So, and it's, I mean, the other thing I do, like, it's a weird little trick, is that I have to know what terms of endearment a character uses. That's very important to me. So like Jake calls everyone darling, well, I calls women darling, and that's kind of deliberate. But when he's really worried about Maisie and his voice gets quiet, he says, come on, baby. You know, he calls her baby. He kind of goes back to the bond that they had when she was little. So it's always really important. And it's been hard, you know, for my hero, Luca, in the gin club to figure out what he calls his son, because I knew he didn't use sweetheart or darling, you know, anything like that. And I knew he didn't use honey. His ex-wife uses honey. So he calls his son Xander Zmeister. You know, Zmeister's his nickname.
That's cool. That's cool.
So yeah, it's things like that. For me, it's all about the voice. So I have to be able to hear the character's voice, and then I have to be able to see their body language. I have to know how they react to things. But yeah, it's little tricks like that. You know, do they cuss? Do they swear? I mean, there is the F-bomb in my books, and I know I get a lot of flack from that from readers. that's but you know, if a character uses the F-bomb, if that's how I hear the character, that's how it's going to come out. So Luca, for example, doesn't swear, but there is one line. There's one line, and I'm like, you go, Luca, when you're in his head and he uses the F-bomb, and it's the perfect line. I just know it, you know, it's like, yes, because he doesn't cuss, he doesn't swear. So Barbara, what tricks do you use?
Well, I know one of the things I did early on, somebody had given me an assignment to take a scene and write it from a different character's point of view. And I took the scene early in book 1 when Monty is trying to find Adana. Her Queen Kiora is on her deathbed and she can't find her. And she's looking all over the fortress for her because she's been summoned to her mother's bedside. And she runs into Samantha, and Samantha's another watcher. And I wrote it from Samantha's point of view. And all of a sudden, Samantha, I knew so much more about Samantha than I realized I knew. A lot of times my characters tell me, and I know that sounds weird, but they do. They tell me who they are and how they act. If I get stuck on something, sometimes if I just sleep on it, I'll wake up early in the morning and it's kind of fleshed out in my brain, and I'll just sit there and think about it. And it's like, oh yeah, you're right. That's exactly what you would do. So, and also when I write, I am literally there inside that person. And so whatever they're feeling, whatever they're thinking, whatever they're seeing, whatever they're smelling, whatever they're doing, I'm doing that. And you know, maybe I'm crazy, I don't know, but
It's also, I don't know about you, but you know, I read aloud, I edit aloud, and I actually do one character edit at the end when I basically read every character through, even if they're not a point of view character, to make sure I've got their cadence. Because there's one thing I hate as a reader is when, especially point of view characters, all sound the same.
Right.
So for me, I've got whatever it takes to find the character's voice is what, like, you know, Jake saying darling. I mean, that's Jake. I just hear someone say darling, or, you know, he doesn't say hi, how are you? He goes, how's it going? You know, I know an English person doing a Southern accent. I know, what am I? But yeah, that, you know, it's sort of that, and it's the little phrases that you know, it capture that character, and it has to work. It has to work when you read them aloud.
Right. Like, you know, Lyra stomps her foot, and Lyra's kind of demanding at times, and then she's wheedling at times, and so that fits. I can't put that into Adana. That's not Adana. I don't do the read through like you do. I've heard of authors doing that, where they read through each character. But when I read, I pay attention to, does that sound like that person? And if it doesn't, I can fix it pretty quickly. But yeah, you've got to make sure each one of them sounds correct. And for example, Gloom is an incredible character who's throughout the stories. And Gloom, he's the draft keeper.
He doesn't say a whole lot, and he's still a really strong character.
He's what?
He doesn't say a whole lot, and he's still a really memorable character.
But he often calls Adana Missy or Mistress. He often does. And then when he starts being around Kiffin, he kind of carries that over to Kiffin a little bit too, where it's not your majesty, it's not your highness. He has kind of an honorific, but it's not really the honorific, and he gets away with it. So it's kind of interesting how he addresses people. And there's another very small character in the books, Gergold, who comes up in the second book. And Gergold is kind of the same way with Lyra, with a little bit different take on it. He's more talkative. So you're going to get more out of Gergold than you'd ever get out of Gloom, but he also doesn't use those honorifics. He has his own way of referring to them. And it's just kind of intriguing how they all speak differently, and you've got to make sure they do. There's nothing drives me bananas more than reading a book and having two characters' point of view and they both sound like the same character. So yeah, it's real important to get that part right, for sure.
I love that you both pay such close attention to your characters' voices. That's really, really special. Especially like, it sounds like you both have a way of like kind of sinking into your character's perspective.
We're not crazy, really.
No, that's amazing. And I think that your readers will get that when they're reading the book. They'll come alive for them. It is a little after 7, so I think we're going to have to stop there, but we do have several notes in the chat just saying how much they've enjoyed talking with you both, and that they're looking forward to receiving your books. We've had a couple people order them, and as soon as we get Barbara Evers' book in, we'll do all the shipping. So they're on the way. Do you guys have anything you want to finish with, or?
Just thank you. Thank you to everyone for joining in and spending an hour with us. And thank you, Jackie, for doing this and setting this up. And thank you, Barbara, for inviting me.
Well,
because I wouldn't have read your books. I'm so behind. I buy all my friends' books, but you know, I'm like 10 years behind in my reading. And then I thought, we're doing this thing. I really should make an effort to read her book. And I started and I was going, oh my God, why am I not reading this book?
So,
and then halfway through the second one. So.
And the thing is, you know, Barbara, I was so excited when I was talking to, I have a publicist I work with, and I was like, well, we could do this person, their fantasy. I said, there's Barbara Claypole White. And she goes, oh, let's do her because y'all write in 2 different genres. And I was like, do you think that'll work? And she says, yeah. And so first of all, thank you so much for saying yes. Thank you, Jackie, for having us. Those of you who are here and who are hanging into the bitter end here, thank you so much. Some of you, you know, Rob, it's been a long time. It's been a long time, and it's great to see you. Connie, it's been a while to see you. And I mean, I saw Maureen Shabandi on here, and some of the people from my writers group, and there's several people who I'm thinking, you know, the other Barbara, but I'm glad you came, and just thank you so much. You don't know what it means when you create a story and people read it. There's something phenomenal about that, and I waited a long time for that to happen. And I'm just, thank you so much for reading it. And if you liked it, please put a review up on Amazon and Goodreads. I'm not on BookBub yet, so you can't do it there. But, and Barbara's books, I've read every one of her books, and they're amazing, and read her books. So.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank
you for those lovely notes.
Stay healthy.
You too, and please buy their books. They're wonderful, and we hope that you'll read them. And if you want signed copies, we have signed copies at Hub City. So thank you, Barbara Evers, and thank you, Barbara Claypole White. We really appreciate you coming. And have a good night.
Good
night, everybody.
Good night, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Oh, man.